another episode in our Women in Tech YouTube series. Today I'm joined by Melissa and we're just going to be chatting about her experiences, her journey and how she got into tech. Melissa, could you just give us a little introduction to yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Melissa Siah. I am one of the founders of Syntacog, which is a new RegTech company for health and safety. I've had a bit of an interesting career history actually. I studied software engineering and law. So first of all, I had a career as a lawyer for about 10 years. And then I switched about 6 years ago back into the tech industry, into startups and specifically legal tech and AI.
Nice. For those that don't know, would you mind just explaining a bit about what RegTech is?
RegTech is the startup area that's focusing on regulatory compliance. It's often been used in fintech because there are a lot of regulations that govern how financial institutions and banks work. And now we're looking into broader areas. So for example, my startup works in health and safety, and it helps small businesses to get on top of their obligations in a really easy way.
Oh, cool. And you used to be a lawyer, is that right? Could you just tell me a little bit about that?
I was this is a little bit of an unusual career path, I should just mention. So most lawyers go into commercial law. And so after university, I did a year in a commercial law firm where I did very traditional legal work like wills and estates and small businesses and leases and things like that. And then after that, I decided I wanted to work on something that was more related to my passion, which is around technology. So I actually went and worked for a government regulator called the Australian Communications and Media Authority, which regulates telecommunications, broadcasting, the internet and radio spectrum. So I got to work on some very interesting matters there, things like interpreting new areas of law, working out new policies when there's a new technological development, what kind of law should apply to it, how does existing law apply to it, or how does it need to be changed?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that technology was your passion, so I'm kind of interested to find out sort of where did that passion come from? Where did you find your passion in tech?
I think it started when my parents bought me my first computer, actually. Well, technically they bought the family the first computer, and I was 9, and it was one of those giant beige PCs. I think it was a 286. Right, and it had a huge hard drive with 40 megabytes of storage space, which now you can't even. I don't think you can get a disk that small. But I was just amazed because you could do so many things with it. You could play games. You could spreadsheets. I remember learning about the software then was called Lotus 123. And I don't know if anyone uses it anymore. I think it might have died. But I remember discovering that you could put formulas into spreadsheets and calculate things automatically. And it was just this amazing new world that you could create anything you could imagine, I guess. And I just fell in love with it.
That's such a nice little story there. So how did you find sort of working in like the legal industry and that sector, and then working in tech? How could they compare?
There are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I mean, the legal sector is very traditional. I mean, it's existed for hundreds of years, and if you think about some of the things that we still see, the history of them goes back to, for example, the fact that when you look at court costs, you actually get charged in groups of 100 words. And that was to do with the fact that scribes had to be employed in the old court systems. And so, that became a tradition. And then so that then shifted to time billing, in which lawyers, charge you every 6 minutes and so on and so forth. And you can see how things have come out of the past, and you can also see, do they still need to be there, and what kinds of ways can we change it to make it work better for everyone? Because time billing, for example, has all sorts of effects in terms of incentives to work very long hours, for example, which obviously then affects people who might not want to do that all their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out. Like the legal sector is actually a lot more traditional than tech. Tech is quite it's a new sort of, not a new industry, but as in sort of the way that it's grown so drastically over the past few, the past decades. And legal is very traditional, which I guess can be sort of, like you say, it can have positive and negative impacts being that sort of traditional.
I guess I've always looked to work at that kind of intersection, so working on how laws affect new technology, and now I'm working on how new technology can change the area of law.
Yeah, so how has your experience as a woman been? If you could sort of describe what your experiences have been like as a woman in sort of in professional industry.
In a sense, I think as a woman in law at a junior level, it didn't particularly affect me. I mean, I'll give you an example. Coming out of software engineering at university, I was pretty used to being in an environment where I was maybe 1 in 10, or there'd be 1 in 10 or maybe 1 in 20 girls in the school. And then going into a law firm, there was a much better gender balance, actually, certainly at the junior levels. I think the impact really happens when you progress a little bit further in your career for lawyers. Once you start thinking about maybe settling down, having a family, and then the long hours really begin to impact your career progression. On the other hand, in tech, there's always been a balance, and obviously I had my legal career first, so that was 10 years before switching back to tech. But it did strike me when I came back to tech how imbalanced it was. I think I've had one person, one other woman in my team in my first job, and then in my second job it was still maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 15. So there's a really big gender imbalance for women in technology.
It's weird, and we do see that gender imbalance as well. And I kind of find it strange, because I guess we know that there are women in tech, so it's kind of like, where are they? But so when you did software engineering, like studying, was there a gender imbalance there, or did you find that a little bit more equal?
That it runs all the way through. So I think it was probably 1 in 10, 1 in 20. And it's interesting. I mean, I think about some of the other girls who were in school with me, and they're still in tech. It's not like they've left. And they still work, I mean, at the stage that we're at, they tend to be more in management now, but they're still working in technology. I don't know why it wasn't that attractive a course, perhaps, so we didn't, it wasn't that they came into the course and then dropped out. It just, they weren't actually seeing it as a career, perhaps, when you're choosing what to study when you come out of high school.
Having that sort of experience of being, one of the few women sort of studying and then also working, both in your legal career and in your tech career, what did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome? And maybe that was because of that sort of, that not having someone sort of similar to you who you could look up to, relate to.
I suffered from imposter syndrome all the time. I think it's one of those things people just don't talk about. I have a group of friends who work largely in tech, but also in kind of the new law areas. So there are a whole lot of new legal tech-based companies that do consulting and, legal knowledge design and legal engineering. That's the other word for it. And it's odd because we're a group of incredibly accomplished women, and yet I don't know that any of us are completely confident in our skills, which is crazy, right? I mean, I think there are a couple of things. One is that programmers and engineers that I've worked with have not always been great at coaching each other. So it tends to be more of a solitary endeavor. And you kind of assume that everyone else is doing really amazing things, or everyone else knows what's really going on. But one of the things I've realized over the years is that even really, really experienced people, they just learn by trying things and looking it up and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing. It's not that they just know how to do things.
So true, it's so true. I think it's very easy to sort of feel like, oh, I don't know enough, or I think everyone does have them sort of worries. But no, you're so right. I think a lot of the time, nobody can know everything, and there will be things that people who you think are so experienced, they don't know. And it's also interesting as well that you sort of mentioned like legal tech, because I think with diversity and with women in tech and like BAME in tech, I think it's so important that there's actually a lot of legal things behind it. So like if you don't have women in tech, then it can actually impact the tech, and it can impact the legislation that's made as well. That's what I'm trying to say. So diversifying tech also has sort of a bigger implication, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in design in general, it's amazing how women can be invisible. I don't know if you've read that book. I think it's called I'm gonna have to send it to you. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. It's either The Invisible Woman or Invisible Women, I think, possibly. And it's fascinating because it talks about things like medical studies, right? So when people are doing animal testing, it's easier to have all male mice, because that way you don't have to manage, hormonal changes. But that means that your tests don't, of course, reflect women who have much stronger hormonal changes over time. And therefore, you don't actually know whether it has the drug or the principle you're testing affects women in the same way. I remember seeing something that said, they just didn't design crash test dummies to mimic women's bodies. They designed them for men, and then the seatbelts held people in the wrong places for a very long time. And then so women were getting injured more because they weren't being properly restrained during car crashes. And so designing things is an area where I think it's really important to keep in mind not just women and men, actually, but very much the differences between across the population, because I think often people design for this standard, and you're like, well, the average person weighs, this much and is this tall, and it's like, well, one of my sisters-in-law is like 130 centimeters tall, and those standards don't work for her. Right? So I think it's really important to think about your users, obviously. As a product person, users are absolutely, your number one guiding principle. You always have to think about what users need, but to also remember that there's a lot of diversity within your user base. I was talking to someone the other day about one of my other projects, which is around how do we make work better for women, right? Like, how do we redesign work so it's not all about an 8-hour day, 5 days a week, which doesn't really fit with so many things in our lives. So yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to think about these things. You see it in a lot of the AI products and a lot of AI projects in general, where you're like, really? You decided that, you were going to take this data set and use it without thinking about where that data came from. So, for example, facial recognition. So my last job was actually not in legal tech at all. I took a 6-month stint at what's called an emotion AI startup. And basically what it does is it uses computer vision to recognize the parts of your face and see how they move in relation to each other, and therefore use that to interpret your reactions and the emotions that you might be feeling. And that works really well with certain skin colors, so paler skin colors. But one of the issues is that webcams and a lot of digital cameras aren't tuned very well to distinguish between darker skin shades. And so the algorithm that adjusts the light sensitivity and it just doesn't work as well, and therefore facial recognition technologies don't work as well on darker skinned people. And so you just have to think about all these things when you're designing products and algorithms, and also data sets. Data sets is a really big thing at the moment.
It's like you say as well, it's what is the average person? There's not really an average person for the whole population. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I completely get that. And I think that's definitely, like, you've given some great examples of how, without diversifying tech, are there going to be people there to say, this isn't, we need to think about different people when we're designing these products and when we're designing data, exactly like you said. Would you say, if it did, that your legal knowledge helped you in the technology sector?
One of the things I wanted to do when I changed career directions, because it was very much a change. I'd been going along, gradually progressing in my career in government law, and then I thought, I really want to go back and build things. I want to actually make things that people use and are interested in using, because in general, most people aren't terribly interested in the laws that govern, pieces of infrastructure. So I wanted to, and I think this is an important career planning thing as well, that when you're looking at how to shift careers, you think about this very boring phrase, transferable skills. But really, it's about thinking about what you've done and breaking that down into smaller pieces, and not just saying, well, I need exactly the same experience as a person who was already doing this career path. It's thinking about being creative, about, how can I use these skills that I already have in a different place? And that was what I was thinking with legal tech. It was like, well, I know about law, and for product management, it's really important to have a good understanding of the market that you're working it with and the subject matter that you're working with. So I very much was thinking that, well, I've spent all this time in law. Let me see how I can apply that to improve technology that people are using to deliver legal services. So in the case of my first legal tech job, it was all about, all right, I know how to research law, I know how to interpret it, and I know how to work with clients to get them the advice that they need and to give them direction. How do I capture that in a software system? What parts of the system will we need to build? And how can I make the system simple for my users? So it was about applying what I already knew, but in a new context. And I think that's really, for me, I think law and programming are actually really similar, because you have the same kind of need to specify things very precisely. So the computer will do exactly what you tell it to do. If you tell it to do something simple, it will do exactly the way you do it. If you do it if you tell it to do something more complex and you forget to put in half the things you need, it will forget and it will leave them out. So, and that's the same in laws, right? If you write a law and say you have to wear a face covering, there will be people who go, all right, you didn't say I had to wear it on my face. I'm going to wear it as a hat, or I'm going to wear it on the back of my head, or, you know, and this is the thing, like you have to be very precise, both in law and in programming, to get the outcome that you're trying to do. So you need to think about what you're trying to do for your users, and then be very, you know, when you're designing, look at it and go, all right, what are all the different cases, all the different, you know, branches in the logic, I guess.
Actually makes a lot of sense. It's quite a nice way to think about it and sort of summarize what you like, both parts of your career, I guess. Could you just tell me a little bit more about your startup that you're working on now?
Oh, sure. So this is really, really new. So I left the emotion AI startup, which was called Element Human, in June, and I've been thinking about my long-term kind of interest, which is all about analyzing natural languages and particularly legal language using AI. So my interest is around natural language programming. And one of the things that I've been thinking about for a long time is that law is very opaque to most people. If you try and read it, it's very long, it's very complex. The words are used in sometimes not the most obvious ways, and there's a lot of, you know, interaction between the statutes and the case law and so on. And one of the things that's I've been thinking about is when you start a business, and I think women in particular are starting to start more businesses in order to fit work around their lives and make work for them, I guess.
Yeah.
And when you're a lawyer, you know things like you have to deal with tax, you have to deal with employee arrangements, you have to deal with workplace health and safety, you have to deal with the best corporate structure, you have to deal with GDPR and privacy, you have to deal with permits and licensing, and there's an incredible amount of law and regulation that actually affects your ability to start a business. And it's really hard, you know. I think one of the things that made us think about starting this was we know lots of people, like I get calls from friends all the time going, oh, I need to like work with someone in a different country. How do I do invoicing and tax and deal with billing and things? And as a lawyer, and someone who's run a business before, I've seen those things and I can explain that. But I wanted to design an app that does that automatically for people. So basically the idea is you can log onto this app, it'll ask you a few simple questions about your business, like what country do you operate in and what kind of business is it? How many employees do you have? And then it will automatically generate the list of things that you need to do to comply with health and safety regulation. So for example, you need to make sure that your office has the right temperature controls to have a comfortable working temperature. And that will depend on what kind of work your employees are doing. So the temperature, if you're working at a desk, will be different to temperature if you're doing something physical, like, I don't know, working with machinery or something. And of course, the temperature, if you're working in a food plant, will be different because you might have requirements to keep things very cold in order to keep the food at the right temperature. So there's a whole series of logic, in essence, that you would need to go through if you were a business owner. And the idea is to capture that logic directly out of the regulations and turn it into really simple advice, like, okay, you need to have it between this temperature and this temperature. Have you got heating? Have you got cooling? You can just tick it off, and then it's there and it's captured in your record. So you don't need to then worry about having documentation of that later on.
Yeah, that's really key to, I guess, get those processes need to be done, and you guys are just sort of simplifying it. You have the database where you can have all that information and just really streamlining that process, I guess. You could say, like, what do you see happening in the future for tech? What do you think is coming next? How do you see sort of new technologies developing?
I see technology developing in kind of two ways. One is this kind of continuous iteration of, taking, for example, in AI right now, right? We have a whole lot of algorithms that we've used previously, and then every year people combine them in different ways or make small tweaks, and sometimes they have really, really good results, even from small tweaks, as you kind of test and push things forward. So you have this kind of gradual growth in technology. And then you have what I think are these really big shifts, which are what Malcolm Gladwell calls the tipping point, where all of that work has built up to a point where then it's just everywhere. And if you think about kind of the big technological changes in history, industrialization, electricity, the internet, right? These things, it's not that they were invented and then they just spread everywhere. They were invented, they were reinvented sometimes, and then, they were improved, and then gradually they kind of hit a point where it goes everywhere. I think you can see this in a number of trends. AI obviously is a big one, which is why it is really critical to think about, how we create AI products responsibly and ethically. The internet is probably the one that's most changed the world. I was born in the last pre-internet generation, really. And so it really struck me when I think I was 12 and we got internet for the first time at school.
That must have been, see, I can't really remember, I don't think, when sort of the internet sort of became, like you said, it had that tipping point. I can't really fully remember that, but I can imagine that must have just been like, well, that's surely that for tech, the internet in the past, century has been the biggest development that's been used by as many people, I guess.
It was like a whole new world. If you, I don't, and I'm not even sure people now can imagine. You had phones that were landlines, so that were only at one place. You didn't have mobile phones. You couldn't look things up. You didn't have Google Maps.
I'd be lost without Google Maps.
Email wasn't in wide use because and so you went from this thing where you had, I feel it's not that life was slower exactly, but it was a lot less connected. It was, you had all these gaps where you couldn't necessarily contact anyone, or that you wouldn't be able to look things up. And so you had to plan ahead more. Whereas now I feel like I can pull out my phone and I can look up anything almost. I was doing some research yesterday on the uses of hostages in ancient China, right? A bit of history research. And I pulled out a paper, like I just typed that into Google, and 2 minutes later I was reading a paper on hostage taking amongst, the different tribes and empires and the different customs at Chinese court. And I was like, that's insane. All this knowledge is available. And the other big shift, I think, is going to be in education. So when I did my degree, we studied out of textbooks and printed materials that you had to buy from the university quite often. If you look now, the entire MIT computer science course is available for free on the internet. You can just go and work through the exact same material as as the people who actually go there. And you can find this huge, rich resource of material on YouTube, on, Coursera, that's the word. I was like, but Udacity, all these different ways that you can now learn instead of having to go through a particular type of institution. And I think that's a really positive thing. It opens up all these skills to people who might not be able to go to university or might not be able to put aside that much time to do like a full degree.
I think that's probably something that we've really seen, like a massive trend. You mentioned education there, but also we've mentioned previously as well, at work. And I think a massive trend will be that flexibility.
Yeah, I think you're right that there is this whole thing about customization personalization is very much where we're heading. I don't think we're there yet. So, I mean, if you think about the current AI tools and recommender systems, at the moment it's about statistics. People who like this thing also like this thing. And it has this whole assumption behind it that you will you can group people by their tastes. And the people in those groups will be very similar. It was this...
Which is not true.
Which is crazy because, okay, I'll give you an example the other day from Facebook. I shared I think it was a video of a large spider because I'm Australian and venomous animals are a big thing in Australia. We have lots of things that will kill you. And so it was like a joke about Australia and, hey, look, there's this giant spider that will kill you kind of thing. And then for the next 2 days, Facebook decided that I was really, really into spiders and it should show me all these articles about spiders. And I was like, you're missing the point, right? Like, the important things to know about the fact that I made that post were actually that I'm Australian and there is this cultural joke about everything in Australia will kill you. So, what you might want to do is look for other things that are Australian, or that you might want to look for jokes, or, it's not understanding, I think. And so this is one of the things I think will actually be quite interesting in the next part of developing AI as a technology, is getting better context and better understanding of what people have done, as opposed to just, oh, statistically people do this, and therefore, we will, this is our prediction or recommendation, without thinking or kind of looking deeper into the data science. Is that really why they did that? Or is it some other reason? So it's the whole correlation, causation thing. So it's not a big deal if, Facebook is suggesting content that doesn't work, because it did eventually stop showing me the spiders. I was not very impressed because I don't love spiders. It's not a big deal if it's that, but where it starts becoming a problem is when the recommendations then capture some sort of bias. So if you think about in the legal system, people are now using AI systems to predict recidivism, which is when someone who's been caught and convicted of a crime, should we let them out on parole, or should we keep them in jail longer because we think they're going to commit another crime or not comply with the conditions of their parole. And what they've shown is that the data shows that Black men are more likely to be arrested again and convicted of another crime. And that's literally what the data says. Which then you're kind of like, right, so that means we shouldn't let Black men out on parole. That's what the system will recommend because they're more likely to reoffend. But that's not in any way the actual truth, right? Like, the fact that the statistics, the statistics don't actually explain how things happen or why they happened. Because the actual truth is, when you look at the numbers, black men are selected more often for enforcement action. They have less resources to go out on bail, and they have less resources for good legal defence, which means they have worse outcomes at court because they don't know how to properly navigate the legal system. And therefore they get heavier sentences and they're more likely to be convicted. And so you have all these different factors which affect this end result. But what actually shows up in the data, because it doesn't track any of these things, is that black men are more likely to reoffend, and therefore we should not give them the benefit of, parole, for example. And it's this bias and this awful, I guess it's this embedding of biases that really frustrates me and is dangerous in some AI systems. It's a little bit like, if you look just at statistics, if you take natural language works, you will see that more often doctors are men, referred to as men, or because there was a tradition that the neutral form of referring to someone is he or him. And so this gets picked up in the statistics because we're not filtering, or we're not examining critically what data we feed into the AI system. And so this is one of the things that I'm working on in the legal tech, because for law, it is really important that you can explain how you got to a result. It's not like, oh, well, we voted and, 90% of people voted for this outcome, so that's the correct interpretation. That's not how it works. You have to be actually able to explain how you reasoned through the legal principles to get to something. So yeah. Sorry, that was a very long and...
No, I get it. You're so right. You can't just take the data at face value and say, okay, this is the data, that's it. What you need to analyse the data. And I think that's definitely something that, if you look at AI, it doesn't really do. Why do you think it's important to make women visible in tech?
The issues I see at the moment, so I have a niece who's 6, and her father also did software engineering with me and my husband. And we're very excited because she's starting to do like really basic programming with toys and so on. And in some ways it's a stereotypical thing. It's like, oh, what do women do? So it's really important, I think, to have role models and to fight those stereotypes for younger children, and right through high school as well. I think the other big challenge is how workplaces, I don't know how to say this, it's how to create welcoming workplaces, both in terms of the formal structures as well as the culture. So I really value the workplaces I've been in, which have made a lot of effort to support mothers who are working part-time and to do flexible arrangements, so that people can get home and put their kids to bed, right? And see their kids before they go to bed. And things like maternity leave. Like, I cannot believe the US does not have maternity leave. It's just one of those, do not understand. Because, obviously living in Europe and then in Australia, it's just well, obviously you have maternity. What do you mean? So there are kind of formal structures, and then there's kind of more cultural things around. I was so excited a couple of years ago when one of my staff came to me and was saying, I was talking to them about career development and how to choose a workplace and why did they come and work in that team. And they were like, well, I was really excited because there were 2 senior women in this company. And I was like, 2, right? that's not like this huge number.
No.
Right? Like, she was like, you know, you don't see women leaders. You don't see directors and managers in senior positions taking the lead on big projects. And it was one of the things that I was, you know, I was just like, I don't know, I was touched, but I was also really sad because, you know, that this wasn't normal.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I see a diverse company. I think that's a good company to work for. Yeah, so thank you. I think we've covered a lot of different aspects there. I've learned a lot, and it's really, really great to chat to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was lovely to chat with you too.